This daisy has been zhuzhed, but then there's me. Zhuzh it up, zhuzh it up. It's just a mess. That didn't help anything. Maybe these would help. How's that? But anyway, this video isn't about how to zhuzh up the jug. I mean, wait, no, not the jugs. I mean, the mug. Where's my glasses? Oh, now I can see you. Cool. It's about zhuzhing up your paintings. This is the inspiration behind this video because this little painting was hiding under my bed for 1 or 2 years, gathering dust, when I decided I needed to demonstrate a hack for you guys. So yes, there is a hack included in this video, thanks to Diane Zimmerman. And then it kept evolving into a better and better painting. And I used several techniques to zhuzh it up. So in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you 5 techniques that you can use on almost any painting to zhuzh up your results. So you go from blah to la. So let's get started. This is the footage of me painting this daisy. And unfortunately, as you can see, it was really blurry. So I wasn't able to use it in a tutorial, but I did make another full length from start to finish real-time tutorial for my Patreon members of a daisy that's just like this. And here I am going to cut a hole in some wax paper, and basically it's to protect everything on my painting except for where I want to splatter. And this is the hack that I learned from Diane Zimmerman, who also has an amazing group of 100,000 people on Facebook. And she has a YouTube channel where she shares a few really cool things. And one of them was this splatter idea. So thank you, Diane Zimmerman, for this awesome idea. My drapes, thank you. My drapes are totally wrecked from all the splashing that I've done, and most of it lands on my drapes. So this is a controlled way to splatter. And so you just use a sieve or anything like, a splatter guard can be used. You paint your paint onto the sieve and then you can blow it on with a straw. And look at that cool little splatter effect. And it's so controlled. And my drapes are still clean. Well, they're not, but they would be if this is how I always splattered. So yay, I love this. So that's where I started with this painting, was to do a little splatter. And here I'm going to add a little bit darker splatter. So when you splatter, remember to try to get more than one color. It'll make it a lot more evocative looking. And so I continued to build up the gradient on this flower as it developed. Here goes on the mix of burnt sienna and a little bit of ultramarine mixed in to make kind of a chocolate brown, which I use a ton in both landscapes and animal paintings, by the way. And see, I'm getting it darker along the bottom of the middle. What's the middle of the flower? So I like this so much that I decided to keep working on it. So that leads me to my second idea of how to zhuzh up your paintings. I see a lot of beginners make paintings that have too much of one value. And usually that value is a medium value, not light, not dark, medium. And that's just so meh. So what I'm doing here, what you see me doing here, is adding a gradient from the dark chocolate brown to the middle where it's red orange to the top where you see me using a stiff scrubber. A brush, by the way, that I cannot live without. So I used my scrubber to lighten it up. Then I put in some pure yellow. And later in the video, you'll see me doing a further zhuzh by making that even lighter. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But then I'm adding some purple to those petals to contrast with that yellow. And that's another way to zhuzh up your paintings, is to use contrast. You can use contrast between lights and darks. You can also use contrast between warms and cools. So that purple is really cool and that yellow is bright yellow. And I really wanted that yellow to pop. So how do you get a yellow to pop? You look across the color wheel to its complement, which is purple. And so if you put purple in a painting, it will make the yellows in the painting pop. And if you make that purple a gray, it'll make the yellows pop even more. So that's a sub tip I can tell you guys to zhuzh up your colors. I did a whole video on that about how to make your colors pop, and I'll link that here, about using grayed down complementary colors of whatever color you want to pop. So anyway, the tip I'm doing now, though, is to create a gradient from dark to medium to light, and to have all those values represented in your painting and in parts of your painting. So I wanted the middle part of this flower to have lights, mediums, and darks in it. All right, my next tip on how to zhuzh up your paintings is to add high contrast details. So as the painting progresses, you're going to see me adding more contrast to the area of interest. And that is where the petals meet the middle. So if you have a painting that is getting a little boring, add some contrast. And here is my next tip, which is add really small little high contrast details. And I actually have a video about this too. I call it adding the jewelry. And the jewelry is adding tiny little, very small details, usually small details that really add to the illusion of realism of your painting. And it will make your viewer's eye believe that there's more detail and realism than what you have. So you notice that I'm using a very dark green that I created using French ultramarine and aureolin and a little bit of red added in to make the green look more natural. And I used a very dark green to put in tiny little detail where I'm painting in between the petals. So that's the negative space. So I'm finding places in the painting where I can put small little details that are high contrast, the contrast of the light petals against the very dark negative space around them. So you can add these little bits of jewelry in a painting to really add some zhuzh factor. By the way, I'm using my Princeton Aqua Elite size 4 long that I love. Be sure to check out my description where I have links to all my favorite supplies. There's also a lot of free tutorials down there and other fun things, and a link to my Patreon, which I would love to have you join. And here I'm adding even more contrast between that light center disc part of the flower and the white petals behind it, adding a shadow there to help create some contrast and getting it even darker against the light part of that central disc. And notice what colors I'm using. I'm also using the contrast of color, which is the complementary color of yellow. If you look across from yellow, you see blues and violets on the color wheel. So I'm using those high contrast colors and also high contrast value, darker values behind the central disc. Another way that I like to zhuzh up paintings, I always do this, is to make interesting edges. This is not one of the 5 tips, but this is a sub tip, so you're getting sub tips from me. And I use a scrubber a lot to create soft edges. And when you have a variety of edges, soft edges versus hard edges, it really makes a painting look a lot more special and dreamy. Also see in the shadows where I joined and blended and blurred the distinction between that central disc and the petals in the back of the central disc. I blurred that boundary. That really can add a dreaminess factor to your painting, and a scrubber is great. Just remember, if you end up using stiff scrubbers, that you've got to use really good watercolor paper. And my next thing that I did to zhuzh this up is to add gouache, some white, pure white highlights. I use zinc white. Winsor & Newton gouache is the one I use. You can also use, this is a nice little hack that I heard recently, and that is to use gesso. So you can also try gesso, but see how I'm kind of using a dry brush technique? So I'm doing 2 things here. I'm adding contrast, but I'm also adding some interest to my edges by using kind of a dry brush technique to add a little bit of variety in the textures at the edges of things. So think in terms of adding variety to your painting by having varied edges that look different. Here I'm making dry brush edges, and also I'm punching up that contrast even more by adding this white detail jewelry effect with this white gouache in the lightest areas. And also on the very top of that central disc, I added some white gouache to pop out my gradient even more. So I have a pure white now in my gradient. And so it goes from pure white to medium to dark in that central disc of the flower. A new thing that I've been doing lately and playing with on my animal paintings, and also this is the first time I've tried it on a flower painting and I loved it, is to use white gel pen. I use a Signo broad gel pen and add some scribbles. And this can be thought of as another way of making edges more interesting, because I'm doing it mostly at the edges to create a little bit more interest by adding some scribbles. This works great in fur. I haven't tried it in a landscape, but that will be coming, I'm sure. So no matter what your subject, all these ideas, these Zhuzh ideas would work whether you're painting a portrait, a landscape, an animal, a flower. Check out the description below and you will find links to free tutorials and other goodies, my favorite supplies, and all kinds of fun stuff like my Facebook group. Thank you so much for joining me on this tutorial. If you would like to learn more in depth from me on Patreon without ads, and by the way, depending on what tier you join, you can access up to 90 other tutorials. And if you join for a whole year, I will mail you goodies if you join at the $13 and up tier for a whole year. And you get line drawings, reference photos, and supply lists for every single tutorial that I have. All 90 of them have all that good stuff, all those accoutrements. I shouldn't try to be French, but anyway, that does not zhuzh me up in any way. But I would love to have you there. Please like this video, subscribe, and come see me next week. Now go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody. How do you spell zhuzh anyway? Z-H-O-S-H? Am I even saying it right? Is it zhuzh or is it zhuzh? Zhuzh? Zhuzh?